Welcome to today's live video history chat. And church bell has just chimed 8 o'clock here, so maybe 7 o'clock in the UK for those of you who are there. Today I'm going to talk about the Great Train Robbery. Now, this is a slightly different subject to the sort of thing I usually talk about. I am obviously normally doing things related to Second World War above all, and so if you say Nazism and communism, that's my usual subject. But here I've gone off it. And I think, though, what I'm about to say is going to be slightly different from what others will do. Today, effectively, marks the 60th anniversary of it. I say effectively because the train 60 years ago today was on its way south from Glasgow. It had left Glasgow given in about an hour ago, and it was making its way to Euston Station in London, the train that was about to get robbed. Now, one thing I find particularly obnoxious is the way that criminals are glorified, as though there was something great about them. And everything I see or tend to see related to the Great Train Robbery has glorified the criminals, forgetting about the victims of the crime, as though the victims just don't matter. And this is very much the case. Indeed, if we take the film Buster, now if I remember rightly, the byline on for the film when it came out at the end of the 80s, it said something like "He'll steal your heart," as though again it is some kind of gentleman thief, sort of a Robin Hood figure, and who was offering something positive to the world. Indeed, also we have this glorification of Ronnie Biggs. Ronnie Biggs himself said that he had become a national institution, and therefore he should be sort of let off for his services to the United Kingdom. Indeed, Ronnie Biggs, in his time he was in Rio de Janeiro, and you can find video of this on YouTube, not just when he was hanging out with the Sex Pistols, but things of later, when people would actually go there and he would entertain them with stories of crime or living as a criminal in the early 1960s in the Kingdom, and as though this were something to be of. Anyway, my opinion is that it isn't the case. I'm just going to sort of give it a slightly different or also angle to this. I've seen things to John Gotti in New York, and seeing how popular he appeared to be in New York. Now, I don't know. I was never there. I've been there. Never mind, I wasn't there in the 80s. I've never been there. And I lived in Sicily, and I can say there that the mafia is hated. There's no question of it. Maybe the hate's a bit less now than it was, because the mafia largely seems to have been defeated. There may be a reason for that. It may be that the mafia in Sicily is seen as being part of the system, whereas for example, these criminals, if it's the gangs in London in the 1960s or the mafia in New York in 1980s, is seen as people who are against the system. That might be the reason. I don't know. But anyway, so the thrust of my argument, and it's based by archival research, is that these were pretty evil people. Anyway, so let's go to the beginning. Bruce Reynolds was as a character born in 1931. He was more or less the boss, or the person who put it together, the great brains of the operation. He left school at 14 in 1945. He was born in Charing Cross Hospital. His father worked at the Ford Dagenham plant. His mother died, I think, in 33 or 35, so he didn't really know his mother. He worked for a couple of jobs in this area of the City of London. He worked for the Daily Mail for But he found in one job though he fell into bad company, and he started out in a life of crime, taught him how to certain types of theft, and he started actually doing it. As he got better, that is to say, in between spells of time in prison, Borstal to start off with. Borstal is was, I believe, a sort of prison for youngsters. Young offenders were sent there. He got to like more and more the good life. So he would do he liked expensive cars, he liked nicely cut suits and things of this nature, and sort of hanging out in expensive clubs. One of the things that he would do later, he went even to the south of France. He'd find out where the parties were, he'd find out who was going, and when they found out who was going, you'd know that the houses that they occupied were empty, and he would burgle them. Now, in an interview which you can see on YouTube, he says that his crimes were largely the word he uses is non-invasive. I think he meant to say that he wasn't actually causing physical harm to people, as though stealing from big houses was okay. But that isn't exactly true. In 1957, or 58, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was 57. There was a bookie at the dog track in White City in London, the western part of London. He assaulted the bookie with somebody else and stole £500. Now, to put this in context, what £500 is, in the time of the Great Train Robbery, 1963, now, my calculations, the money is roughly, my calculations is 22.3 times more today. Okay, that's a rather difficult one to calculate. Let's just say 25 times more in 1957, 25 times 500. That gives you an idea of what it was worth. Now, my parents bought a house at this time, cost them £2,300, again, if I remember correctly. So if that cost of a house, stealing from the bookie, it's 20% of the cost of a house. That is what they did, and they did it with violence. It wasn't a case of them coming to him and saying, "Excuse me, if I've got if you don't mind, please, could you give us some cash?" They used violence on him, and Bruce Reynolds went to prison for 3 years. Now, it's said that in prisons, the criminals, the only thing they do is they learn how to commit more crimes when they get out. And if that's the case, then clearly the prisons are too soft. It should, in my way of thinking, it should be so hard that they'll never want to commit a crime ever again, because that is the only way that deterrence actually works. Anyway, so he took part in a couple of robberies, which came to be quite famous. Towards the end of 1962, at Heathrow Airport, there was a wages robbery, which was very well planned, and there's a German film which is called The Gentlemen Require Payment. I think that's the translation of it, and where it was actually acted out. And in this film, sorry, not the film, in reality, they dressed up as city gents, and I can recall as a child now seeing these city gents, everybody dressed the same with this suit and this bowler hat on. I don't think you get them any longer, and an umbrella. So all dressed the same. They hid in a toilet in Heathrow Airport, and then when the wages arrived, they used violence on the people there. They grabbed the wages. They had 2 Jaguars waiting outside. The Jaguars came up. The wages went in the boot. They went off and they escaped. Now, the police more or less knew who had done it, but they didn't have any proof. And so effectively, they had to wait, and they knew they'd have another go. This brought in around £68,000. So times that by 22.3. Well, let's just say 23, because it's not quite, that's 1963 yet. and you'll get the value in today's money. Now, it seems that they expecting to get a lot more. Indeed, his next attempt at getting money, he stole money from a train at Swindon railway station and got away with £700, which also itself must have been quite a disappointment. Now, I have not worked with criminals, so I don't know how it is, but I do know when our business ideas get shopped around. Now, and I think it works on exactly the same principle. Now, for example, when outside here, there is a building. It's a mixed residential retail use building. That was my idea. I know you don't believe me, but it was. And in 2001, and I tried to put this deal together for a building. And so you do this by, you take it to people who you think might be interested, and then you try to bring all the people together to do it. And then once you've done that, then you try and arrange the finance, the main part of the finance, because you should arrange the guarantee finance up front. Now, I think what happened is the following. There's somebody whose name has gone down in history as the Ulster Man. He was the source of the information. And it was this. They knew that the trains would traveled from Glasgow and would come down the west coast, the West Line, to London, and picking up money on the way, which would then be deposited with the Bank of England. And if somebody could stop the train somewhere, and they could take the money off and take it wherever they wanted. So the plan had been sort of shopped around various criminals. Now, the Ulsterman himself was not going to actually be able to carry it out. But if he could find somebody who could actually do it, then he would be in for a stake in the cash. One day, he brought it to a solicitor's clerk in London. Now, the solicitors had represented criminals. In fact, they'd actually, Gordon Goody, who was a later bank robber, got him off. It was his brother, I believe, had got off. And then he discussed this potential thing to him, and then it was brought to Bruce Reynolds. He then tried to put the whole thing together. So you've got a train which is coming down. It's collecting money en route. Now, in those days, you had, in fact, I bet they still got them. The train would be a post office. Not really a post office. It's a sorting office. So that letters would, well, you don't have letters anymore, but people used to write to each other. And so the letters would be on the train, and then they'd be sorting the letters as the train moved. And as they stopped at various places en route, they would be leaving the letters and maybe taking more letters on board. And that's how they were distributed. So the idea was, first, how do you stop the train? Where do you stop the train? How do you get the money off? And so Bruce Reynolds put this whole thing together. He didn't really have the experience of stopping trains, but he knew people who did. There was a gang called itself the South Coast Raiders. I've also heard them called the South Coast Riders, but I think that it was meant to be Raiders. And they'd stopped a couple of trains and got a few shillings off them. And so that was the expertise that they required. They brought them into a gang. Now, the gang consisted of a large number of people, which was unusually large. But then again, this was a big job and it would require a lot of help. Now, according to the Ulsterman, there could be as much as £1 million on the train. And if that's going to be shared 17 ways, that's a lot of cash. It's almost £60,000 each. So that sounds like a pretty good deal. Times it by 22.3, and then you've got the approximate value of it, enough to set you up for life. Well, at least that's what it seems in theory. Now, the train itself was to be stopped by using a signal, so they worked out how to do that. Then they would take the cash off, and then they would take it to a hideaway. Now, they took the hideaway. They found a farm which was off the road, with no asphalt road to it, and it was seemed to be them to be really well hidden. And using the same solicitor's clerk, they arranged to purchase the house, but they weren't going to purchase for the full amount. What they did was they paid a deposit, and then after that was paid, occupancy was allowed. I have never heard of something like this ever happening in history ever before, that Leather Slave Farm was purchased in this manner. Not only that, this to me seems to be really dodgy planning, because, but anyway, we'll get on to that. Right, so 60 years ago today, trains going south. 60 years ago tomorrow morning, what they did was they stopped the train. Now, they stopped the train. If you've got on the railway line, they've got a signal, which is it's on the track, sort of track level, and you've got signals above them. The one that's at track level is called a dwarf signal, and that is a warning for what is to happen. So what they did was they stopped the green light, only two lights, the green light by putting a glove over it, and the red light, they used a battery pack to make it work. So the light came on red, train's coming down, and the train sees the dwarf signal, and up ahead it sees the next signal, it stops, it's red. Now, they found a location where they could collect the money from the train, but this was approximately about a kilometer, just over a kilometer from where the signal would be. So what they needed to do was to take the train from the red signal to where the location was, that they could take the money off the train. What they needed was something like a bridge, not a level crossing, because that wouldn't work, but a bridge where the train could stop, a place which had a gentle enough slope for them to actually get down, place them to park vehicles so they could take the stuff off, and then escape to wherever it was they were going to. Right, so on the night of the crime, what happens? The train comes along and it stops at the signal. Now, that's the first carriage the first part is the train, the engine. Then you've got the high value HVP, high value packet wagon, and then you got the rest of the post office train behind it. So it was always the high value part was always just behind the tractor, the train. Anyway, so they stopped the train. Now the next bit is that they need there's about 70 people on this train, and so what they don't want 70 people fighting them, so they need to separate the two. So what they did was the following: the train stops, the driver's mate is called David Whitby. He was then 26 years old. He jumped down and he went to make a phone call because they had the places to actually call from. Now unfortunately they'd cut it. The criminals had cut it. He wasn't able to. They assaulted him, and they used so much violence on him. And this is this wasn't shown in Buster or anything like that. that he suffered from trauma, which was so bad that he had a heart attack at age 32, I think, or 34, I can't remember. But at a very young age, he had a heart attack. They then attacked the engine from both sides. Now, the 57-year-old driver tried to fend them off, but obviously he was attacked both, and somebody hit him over the head, whacked him with a metal bar. Now, that could have killed him. It didn't, but he died in 1970, 7 years later. He never went back to driving trains again. He had a very long time, a period off. He was then went on to light duties, as did David Whitby. He was on light duties, and then he had to retire. But his family said he never was the same again. Not only that, Gordon Goody, the son of Gordon Goody, one of the robbers, has said, well, look, what he died of had nothing to do with it. He died of leukemia. Yes, he died of leukemia aggravated by pneumonia. But one of the causes of cancer, of course, is stress, and this might have had something to do with it. But he had headaches until the rest of his life. And that is what these heroes actually did. Now, having stopped the train and having got control of it, they now need to drive it. One of the things that they thought of this, that the driver mightn't actually cooperate with them, so they brought a driver in. And this brings in Ronnie Biggs into the story. Going back a few months, Ronnie Biggs and Bruce Reynolds had known each other they've been in prison together. And Ronnie Biggs paid a visit. He went round to see Bruce Reynolds, and possibly it was to borrow money or something like that. Anyway, he was about to leave, and he said that he was taking his son to a friend who was a train driver, and the train driver would actually take him for a ride. And now Bruce Reynolds had been looking for a train driver. This was an incredible coincidence, and he asked him, well, is he bent? And Ronnie Biggs said he'd put it to him. Now, this train driver, who was never caught, he was retired, but he's just before his retirement, he'd been shunting trains around in the train garage. He wasn't a long distance driver. He was put inside the train, but into the driver's carriage, but he couldn't get it started. But there's two reasons for that. Reason number one is because the robbers had separated the coupling between the high value carriage and the post office part. And now part of this is apparently every schoolboy at the time knew this. I mean, I didn't, but then again, I wasn't a schoolboy at the time. But the braking system works on a pneumatic or vacuum system, and when you brake, you have to do it in such a way that the brakes will still work. What had happened was that when they broke the coupling between the two, there was no built-up vacuum, and so therefore the brakes were hard on the wheels, so they couldn't unbrake it. Now, the driver himself, they put their own Ronnie Briggs's driver there, and he couldn't start the train, so he had to build up the vacuum. The others, they were working on a timetable. Some things could be noticed. I mean, as it happened, the fact that they cut the telephone wires, but this had already been noticed. They didn't know the reason why the people, the general post office who were then did with the telephones. They didn't know why it was down, but it was down. Then the next thing was that the train had a new brake on it, so the front bit of it was new, and he didn't know how to operate it. So the driver, who was already in a semi-concussed state, they got him up, threatened him and told him to move it. Now, at this moment, I think he must have been working on adrenaline, and he must have been terrified what they were going to do to him. They'd already hit him over the head with a metal bar. And he must have been in fear for his life, but he managed to drive it, and he probably drove it with the brakes on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, okay, I never, as a child, I wasn't that interested in trains, but I didn't know that this would, but this is a schoolboy error, that train, you cannot break the coupling, you can't just uncouple it without the effect it has on the brakes. Anyway, now they brought it to a bridge called the Bredigal Bridge, later called the Train Robbers Bridge. It's now got in 2013 they changed the name to something else, and now they had to attack the high value carriage. Now here's something which is very odd. In 1960, the post office, which had a sort of security team or department, they had started putting in these high value carriages with deadlocks, and some were to be equipped with radios, although that hadn't yet been done. But most of them by this time had deadlocks. Somehow they knew that this was one of the older carriages which didn't have the deadlocks. So that was a bit of information, and I don't know how that the criminals knew about that. So to me, that seems to indicate that it is an inside job somehow. That seems to me to indicate. I mean, that's never come out in court, or there's no evidence. I just can't explain that any other way. I'm sure somebody else would be able to, maybe. So anyway, they attacked the carriage with using extreme violence. Now, what one can do, at the National Archive in Kew, in West London, there is the records from the Great Train Robbery. I went there. Now, some of these records are still a secret. That will be a secret until 2042, I think it's 2042. And now, some people don't think things being secret, but I would have to say this. If I were an informer, I certainly wouldn't want everybody going to the national records to find out who had actually informed. And as I'll get on to, there were informers who actually gave the game away. So I understand these things. So when people complain about things being secret, that is not the way I see. I absolutely understand. And for example, with the other 1963, a great event being the assassination of JFK, and parts of that are still secret, then I mean, I understand. I really do. I mean, you just can't make things of this nature public. If not, no one will ever cooperate with the police or with the authorities again if they think that the name is going to be Freedom of Information Act is going to be plastered all over the place. Anyway, the report, the police evidence from the given by the victims of the crime is there. It wasn't a case of them just getting on saying, "Excuse me, I'm really sorry to bother you, but this is a robbery. If you don't mind, could you go to one side over there, just sit down, make yourselves comfortable. We're just going to help ourselves to the cash in these sacks, and that's it." So we're and so that's they didn't do it that way. Two of the people at least resisted them, but they didn't have a chance. They were massively outnumbered. The people who were coming at them had blunt instruments, blunt weapons, and how were they to defend it? So they couldn't. And what they then did was they forced open a cage where these sacks of cash was kept, which probably didn't take much breaking open. And then they formed a human chain to take the sacks down from the railway train into the lorry and the two Land Rovers that they had waiting for them outside. Now, they had the getaway vehicles were military vehicles, or dressed up to be military vehicles. Anyway, one of the Land Rovers had been stolen in the Strand the previous night. And so they used the army, and they were dressed up to look as though they were army people. Now, the army sort of does run around places at night, I know, because I used to do it. And so if people had seen military trucks on the road, then I don't think really that they would have really thought too much about it. But the train, that they looked like military vehicles, and this information was then passed on to the police the following day, or the same day, in fact, but later the same day. The robbers had told them something along the lines of to wait 30 minutes, that one of them was going to stay behind, and he's a right nasty so-and-so. And now, when this information was passed to the police and then got in the hands of the press, it's from 30 minutes, they translated that to mean 30 miles. And so that was what they knew they had to search within a 30-mile radius. Unfortunately, started searching from the beginning and then moving out. My understanding is the most successful way to do something like this is to start outwards and then move in. That's my understanding. Anyway, so they went back to this farm which they had appropriated, and then the idea was to lay low. And now this to me seems totally ridiculous. I mean, to think you can lay low in the countryside. Now, if you're in the city somewhere, nobody knows who you are and nobody takes any notice. But if you're out in the countryside, you buy a new pair of socks and everybody's talking about it. Everybody in that area would have known what the house was suddenly occupied. They would have seen them around for it's just the way country people are. And not only that, so they get them, they unload their stuff at the house, they put the vehicles in the barns and what have you, and then they count the cash. They were expecting $1 million. Inside there was £2.6 million. Now there's two numbers which have been given. In fact, there's several numbers, but there's only a difference of £36,000. It's just over £2.6 million was taken. Now that, okay, times it by 22.3, and there you've got how much is worth today. It's a huge amount of cash. And anyway, so they're in the farmhouse. They hear on the radio that the police are looking and made this dragnet, and they're looking within this 30-mile radius. The Leatherslade farm was 28 miles from the part of the robbery. And as they were listening to the police broadcast just after getting back, they heard a rather odd message. Somebody said, there's been a robbery, and you're not going to believe this. They've stolen a train. The search was quite intense, and you can see from sort of news broadcasts at the time and in the newspapers of the time that this really was this was the front page of everything. And so they realized that they couldn't actually stay there very long. They divided up the loot, and then they all went in their own ways. Bruce Reynolds, he actually hitchhiked with his cash to a town. Then he went back. He went to London. Then he went to ground. The idea was that the solicitor's clerk was to arrange for somebody to burn down the farm. Now, this to me seems even more ridiculous. I mean, what more could they do to bring attention to themselves? However, the person that was meant to burn down the farm, called the dustman, the dustman didn't actually get round to doing it. The police found it anyway. Having said that, I think if they'd burnt the place down, that would only have just brought more evidence. But the evidence against them was largely, no, entirely based on the evidence they found at the farm. So despite the fact they tried to clean it up, they found fingerprints and other evidence there, hair samples, and so this was enough to later convict them. The thing is, the police more or less knew who had done it, but the trouble was proving it. Fortunately, they were aided by people in the underworld. There was a very sizable reward was offered, which came up to nearly came up to £250,000 from various sources: insurance, the post office, the police, and with that type of money involved, then people were very interested in finding them. The first people to be caught, there was two people who were caught, and they were caught in Bournemouth. It was one of them tried to rent a garage. One of the robbers had tried to rent a garage, and the person he rented from was a policeman's widow. She thought something highly suspicious about this. She'd contacted the police, and he was arrested. The two of them arrested immediately. The problem was here that the second one was probably totally innocent. He went to prison. He got a 24-year prison sentence, and he died in prison. He probably was innocent. So there is another victim of the crime. Gradually they were arrested. Some of them went abroad. In the film Buster, you see him. He went off to Mexico. He met Bruce Reynolds when he was out there. I think Charlie Wilson also came out to Mexico as well. He was another one of the robbers. Eventually, they were caught. Bruce Reynolds ran out of cash. He wanted to live up. So he was in Mexico. Then he went to Canada. He found his way back to the United Kingdom. And he was arrested in Torquay in 1968. Now, there was a trial in January of 1964. And very stiff sentences were given. There was a total for the looking at 24 to 30 sentences. Even the solicitor who'd handled, now solicitor Clark, he was guilty, he was involved in it, but the solicitor, who was probably totally innocent, he got a 3-year sentence. The sentences were deemed to be too harsh at the time. Even there's a very famous newspaper saying, a front page, "Is this too harsh?" Well, to my way of thinking, it was too lenient. They didn't find the cash. So far of the money that went, something like 400 and something thousand pounds was actually recovered. Money was recovered. For example, the solicitor Clark's money was found in a bag in a forest, and inside with the money was a receipt from a place he'd stayed with in Germany with his German wife, and that led the police to actually capture him. Some of them must have given evidence against the others, so that's how they managed to round them up. But the police more or less knew in any case, and they had the fingerprints as well. One or two of them even claimed that the police had actually, even though they'd done it, the evidence against them was they'd been fitted up by the police because the evidence was not correct. But anyway, they said they did. Gordon Goody, for example, he said this. The problem, I think, is the following. Most of these characters served 10, 11 years. Bruce Reynolds was out in 1978. Now, all of them, or nearly all of them anyway, returned to crime. For example, one of them, Charlie Wilson, may have been involved in the 1983 Brinks Mat. He was certainly involved in drugs, and he was shot in Marbella. It was a British investigative journalist called Robin Cook. Now, he confronted him. It used to be about 1988. I watched that quite recently on YouTube. I found it. So none of them showed any sorrow for what they did. Two of them escaped from prison. So Charlie Wilson, he escaped. He went to Canada. I think it was Charlie Wilson. Yes, I think it was. And Ronnie Biggs. Now, he became the most famous of all the train robbers, as though he were the mastermind behind it. He was only brought in by accident because he knew a train driver. But he escaped from prison. He fled to Australia. When he was working normally as a carpenter in Australia. Then the Australian police got onto him, and he had to flee. He got out with in a matter of minutes, it would seem. He got away to Brazil eventually, and then we returned to Brazil with no cash at all. But now I can remember this when he was caught in Brazil. I can remember. I didn't know what the Great Train Robbery was, 'cause I was too young. But I remember when he was caught, and he said, I also remember my father making a comment of it. And it was Jack Slipper, who was was a detective, flew out there, and he said, "Hello there, Ronnie. It's been a long time." And thing was that Ronnie Biggs had got a woman in Brazil pregnant, and Brazilian law didn't permit the father of a Brazilian to be extradited, so he got off. Later, he was also kidnapped, and he was taken to, I think it was Grenada, was somewhere in the Caribbean anyway. But again, he was let off because he said the way he was brought there was illegal. In age 71, he decided he would go back to the United Kingdom. He claimed it was so he could have a pint in a Margate pub, but the fact is that he couldn't pay for his medical treatment, so he thought he'd get the British taxpayer to do it. And if he had to spend some time in prison, well, so what? In the end, he spent 9 years in prison, and he was released on compassionate grounds. Every single video that you can find on YouTube related to Ronnie Biggs, I think I've watched a lot, puts him in just in a sympathetic light. I mean, it certainly comes across as a very sympathetic type personally. He's sort of the lovable rogue, but let's not forget what he did, and let's not forget the victims, particularly the one man in prison and died in prison because of them, and the two train drivers, and the people who were in the high value package who suffered trauma. Well, not much said about them. One thing, Bruce Reynolds called this his Sistine Chapel because it was this military type planning. I agree with them. It was military type planning. It was a bit of a mess, really. The military type planning, because I've been in lots of things that are military planned, and they end up like that. They didn't think about the train, the brake system. They didn't know about the farm. To me, the buying the farm and then think that nobody's going to notice them out in the countryside. Totally ridiculous. Bruce Reynolds planned this so well, he didn't even have a passport arranged for it. He had to stay in Kensington in a house for 6 months waiting for a dodgy passport. And that he didn't even think of that before the crime. So, in my opinion, I wouldn't look on this as the Great Train Robbery. It was more of an Inspector Clouseau operation. But a lot of them got the cash. If they spent, let's say, 10 years in prison, and today, right, so the amount of money that they got is equivalent to somewhere between £2.5 and £3 million. Now ask yourself, is it worth spending 10 years in prison for £2.5 to £3 million? Stay in prison, you get yourself a university degree or something like that at the taxpayer's expense. Well, anyway, what do you think? I mean, it seems like a tempting proposition to me. Right, let's have a look at some of the questions. So, Christopher's old enough to have seen the movie Buster. I saw it recently. I don't think, well, recently, I think, recently, well, not that recently, but a few years ago. I didn't think it was quite good. I didn't like it, actually. Hello, Mike, sorry. Hello, Colin. Colin worked in one of the prisons, on the goodwill of the prisoners. Unfortunately, boot camps don't work. Colin says boot camps don't work. My opinion of a boot camp, that's sort of a military type with a short, sharp shock. Okay, well, I'll leave this one to Colin to tell us. I can't see the point of putting people in with military discipline. First of all, the military will only work if people agree to it, and no amount of, if you're in the army and you're getting shouted at and all the rest of it, and you're there because you want to be there. So if people are shouting at you and for marching out a step or something like that, then that's all part of the fun of being there. I can't really see how that works in prison, but that's my opinion. Colin will know better than I do. Anyway, so the concept, they were called traveling post office, and they were scrapped years ago. No, I'm pretty certain I've seen post office trains on. I mean, I was traveling around a lot in the 80s, end of 80s on trains all over the place. Yeah. Paul would like a video on Christian Viert, Franz Stangl, and Gustav Wagner. Yes, I'll do that one because I spent lots of time talking about Gustav Wagner. I do have a video. In fact, I think it's the first video I ever filmed was with my then girlfriend, and the which is on YouTube, and my I do have a video on Christian Viert, not Christian Viert, on Gustav Wagner, and it's only a short one, but it was some Teuver Blatt. It was in Sobibor, and so yeah. But I will do that. Stangel's going to take much more, is much more complex. I went to the town where Stangl came from in Austria, in Altmunster, a few. It was on 2017. Anyway, yeah, but certainly I'll do that. Yeah, Leather Slade and hello Annie, and right. So a dead man lock on a train. It's called. It's a fail-safe feature. Okay, very good. Hello, Michael. Oh, yeah. So Paul says about the gap between the assault and the death of the people. Yeah, because this is the argument that's used. Now, my way of thinking, I'll stick this light, it's not making any difference. My way of thinking, maybe it doesn't. I'll stick the other one on. Is this making any difference? Yeah, maybe that's better. To my way of thinking is this: if somebody dies as a result of a crime, even if they were dying anyway, that can't be used as a exculpatory factor. Now, to give a very good example, Harold Macmillan was the prime minister in 1963 at the time of the Great Train Robbery. He resigned because he had prostate cancer and he thought he wasn't going to live much longer. As it happened, Harold lived, in 1986 he died, so he lived another 23 years. So he thought he was dying in 63 and he died in 1986. Supposing somebody killed him in 1963, would they say, well, he had prostate cancer anyway, he's only going to live a few more weeks, so you can't, that's not murder. I don't think that is an exculpatory factor, in my opinion. So Colin asks, who was the lady in the red coat when JFK was killed? And Michael was the lead, right? Sorry, I can't see this. I can't see Michael. Somebody was the lead, right? Was it Michael Caine? I can't say. Sorry. What's this? Oh, Michael Caine was the lead, right? How can you not like him? Michael Caine? What was Michael Caine in? He was in Get Carter. I don't think he was in any other film that I can think of, unless you think of The Italian Job. That was a criminal thing. Okay, right. Well, thanks very much for watching. Anyway, so today's video was something a bit more new. It was no for me. It was going through the National Archives. I don't know what made me do this. It was a feeling. Maybe it was. Maybe it was just the thought. It was the disgust of seeing these people who are criminals so glorified as though they were heroes and not what they are really. So that was for me something which was quite important, which I wanted to actually go into. But anyway, sorry. Oh, so the thing's turned around. You know why it's turned around? It's because I started messing around with it. That's why it's happened. Anyway, I'm going to try and turn the gimbal off. And there we go. There's the gimbal turned off. And anyway, thanks for watching. See, Phil Collins was Buster, and I can see there's another comment, but I'm having difficulty actually getting a hold of this to do it. So there we go. So anyway, so see you, Annie. Thanks everybody for being here. There'll be another video tomorrow. I might do Gaily Rabaul, actually. The suicide of Gaily Rabaul, Hitler's niece. I think I'll do that tomorrow. This one here, I was going to do a sort of a documentary type video on it, but then I thought, yeah, it's probably too difficult for me to do a documentary type. And so it was easy for me just to talk. I mean, to getting some of the background pictures and the background video and things like this, that was just too difficult. And I've noticed in many of my the videos, I do background stuff which I film myself. I suppose I could have driven up down. I couldn't drive up because I've got a vehicle in the United Kingdom. I could take the train up to the place where this actually happened. But anyway, I bet lots of other people will be doing that for the 60th anniversary today. So thanks for being here, and all the best from me in Poland.